they said. No drama tonight. Smile for the camera. Keep it pretty. She struck me where the lens couldn't see. 2 quick blows to the ribs as the flash popped, perfume and hairspray burning my eyes. Everyone laughed at a joke I didn't hear. I tasted metal and counted down from 10. By sunrise, the photos would be evidence, and the company they built would belong to me. My name is Rowan Keene, and I am 32 years old. As the head of strategy for Wexford Meridian, I am fluent in the language of hostile takeovers, leveraged buyouts, and the quiet, bloodless violence of the boardroom. Tonight, however, I was not an executive, I was a prop. The Founders Circle Gala at the Marrowgate Hotel was my father's coronation, and I was positioned to make the crown shine a little brighter. The grand ballroom was suffocating in honey gold light, a thick, sweet luminescence that clung to the velvet drapes and polished mahogany. It pooled on the floor, turning the plush crimson carpet into a field of dried blood under the heels of my Louboutins. The air was a heavy cocktail of expensive perfume, spilled champagne, and the collective, anxious ambition of Lake Briar's corporate elite. My father, Marcus Keene, stood to my right, a titan in a bespoke tuxedo, his silvering hair catching the light like a halo of freshly minted steel. To my left, his wife, my stepmother Dahlia, was a vision in emerald silk, her diamonds winking like malicious stars. They had placed me in the center, the perfect demographic bridge between his seasoned authority and her youthful glamour. The family, united, the brand, strong. We were herded against a backdrop of cascading white orchids and the Wexford Meridian logo, a stylized W that looked more like a cardiogram flatlining. A harried photographer with sweat beading on his upper lip aimed his lens. Big smiles. Everyone, a real family moment. Dahlia's hand found my waist, her manicured fingers pressing just above my hip. Her own smile was a masterpiece of cosmetic dentistry, wide and brilliant and utterly devoid of warmth. Through that perfect, unmoving grin, she hissed. Her voice a silken thread of venom meant only for me. Smile wider, Rowan. Her fingers tightened, the tips digging into the space between my ribs like polished stones. I adjusted my posture, my own smile feeling like a mask of cooling clay. I tilted my chin, just as she'd taught me. Present a smaller target. Keep it pretty. The camera flashed, a silent explosion of white. And then it came. It wasn't a shove or a clumsy stumble. It was a precise, targeted blow. As the photographer adjusted his focus for the next shot, Dahlia drove the heel of her hand sharply into my side. The impact was brutally efficient, a focused point of agony that radiated through my ribcage. The air left my lungs in a silent, strangled rush. My knees buckled slightly, a betrayal my body made without my consent. A choked gasp caught in my throat, but it was swallowed whole by the percussive click-whir of the camera's shutter. To the world, it was just another photograph being taken. To me, it was the sound of my breath being stolen. My father's hand, which had been hovering near my shoulder, descended. It wasn't a gesture of comfort. It was an anchor, a warning. His fingers pressed lightly into the bone, a silent command to straighten up, to hold the pose. No drama tonight, he murmured, his voice a low rumble of disappointment, the same tone he used in quarterly reviews when projected earnings fell short. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the lens, on the audience beyond, on the prize he was about to receive. I tasted metal, the sharp, coppery tang of blood from a bitten tongue. I forced my lungs to work, drawing in a shallow, painful breath that smelled of Dahlia's gardenia perfume and the chemical burn of her hairspray. My vision swam for a second, the golden light of the ballroom fracturing into 1,000 tiny shards. I blinked, forcing the world back into focus. I straightened my spine, inch by painful inch, the fabric of my navy blue gown whispering against my skin. As I subtly shifted my weight, my eyes caught a reflection in the polished silver frame of a picture on a nearby table, in the distorted curve of the metal. I saw it, the faint, angry red glint of the security camera mounted high in the corner of the ballroom. Its unblinking eye was aimed directly at our perfect family tableau. A small, cold part of my brain, the part that designs 3-year market domination strategies, took over. It cataloged the data points, the angle of the security camera, the position of the photographer, the reflective surfaces in the room, and the tiny, almost invisible lens embedded in the buckle of my watch. It was a custom piece, smaller than a shirt button, a discreet marvel of espionage technology I had commissioned 6 months ago. I had activated it in the parking garage, a standard precaution before any family event. My thumb had brushed the activation stud as I'd checked the time. Now, the watch felt like a warm, living thing against my skin, its silent recording a promise. In that frozen moment, as the photographer chirped, "Just one more. Perfect." A genuine smile finally touched my lips. It wasn't the vacant, pleasant expression they demanded. This one was mine. It was sharp and full of secrets. This photograph, the one they were taking right now, the one meant to be a testament to their power and unity, would not be a memory. It would be an exhibit. It was the key that would unlock a door they had spent years convincing themselves didn't even exist. And now, the MC's voice boomed from the stage, amplified to the heavens. A man who needs no introduction, the visionary founder and chairman of Wexford Meridian, Mr. Marcus Keene. The ballroom erupted in a wave of polite, sustained applause. Dahlia's hand finally left my side, her touch replaced by the rustle of her silk gown as she turned toward the stage, her face a mask of wifely adoration. As she moved, she leaned in close one last time, her breath hot against my ear. "Don't you dare ruin this." I kept my gaze fixed forward, my smile perfectly in place. I let the applause wash over me, a meaningless tide of noise, and without moving my lips, I whispered back to the empty space where she had been, "I never do." Wexford Meridian was my father's magnum opus, a corporate empire built from a single, shrewd investment in logistics software 2 decades ago. But if he was the celebrated architect, I was the structural engineer, the one who worked in the silence of the foundation, ensuring the entire edifice didn't collapse under the weight of his ambition. I was the ghost in the machine who drafted the acquisition proposals, stress-tested the market projections, and wrote the speeches that made him sound like a visionary. The accolades went to him, the stock options went to me, and for a long time, that silent contract was enough. Then, my mother died. The official cause was a heart condition, but I knew she'd really died of a slow, corrosive loneliness, of being the beautiful, silent partner to a man who only ever truly loved his company. Her absence left a vacuum, and nature, especially my father's nature, abhors a vacuum. Dahlia filled it 6 months later. She was a whirlwind of social grace and razor-sharp ambition, a former art consultant he'd met at a charity auction. She was beautiful, of course, but it was a weaponized beauty. Each smile calculated, each touch a strategic maneuver. Within a year, she wasn't just Mrs. Keene, she was Dahlia Keene, Executive Vice President of Market Development. Her official qualification was a nebulous, innate feel for the market, a phrase my father coined and repeated until the board of directors, men in awe of his success and her charm, simply nodded in agreement. Her lessons for me began immediately, delivered with the same saccharine smile she used on investors, at home, in the sterile, art-filled mausoleum my father called our house. She taught me about gentleness. It was a lesson taught not with words, but with a grip on my forearm that was always just a little too tight, a hand on my back that guided me from a room with insistent, bruising pressure. "A lady doesn't raise her voice, Rowan," she'd murmur if I questioned a decision. "She persuades." Her persuasion was a physical punctuation to her words, sharp and undeniable. The small, discolored marks that would bloom on my arms or shoulders the next day were dismissed with a wave of her hand. "Oh, darling, you must have bumped into the counter again. You're so clumsy in the kitchen." In the eyes of our housekeeper and the few relatives who still visited, I was simply accident-prone. At the office, the lessons were about silence. This was a more sophisticated form of erasure. I would spend a week building a data model for a potential merger, only to hear Dahlia present my key findings in a board meeting as a sudden insight she'd had over the weekend. My meticulously researched reports would be submitted, and the final versions that reached my father's desk would have her name, not mine, in the author field. When I once tried to object, in the cold, glass-walled conference room, she'd cut me off with a pitying look. "Rowan, you're becoming emotional. It's clouding your judgment." My father, sitting at the head of the table, would simply nod. "She's right. We can't afford sentiment in this business. They told me I was too sensitive, that I took things too personally. What they meant was that I was inconveniently aware. So I adapted. I stopped seeing the world as a place of conversation and started seeing it as a chessboard of angles and surveillance. My pain became a catalyst for precision. I learned to count my breaths to control the tremor in my hands after a gentle correction from Dahlia. I memorized the cleaning crew's schedule at the office and at home. I mapped the blind spots of the corporate security cameras and the precise field of view from every reflective surface in our house: the polished chrome of the refrigerator, the dark screen of the television, the antique silver mirror in the hallway. I learned that truth wasn't about what was said, but what could be proven. The discovery, when it came, was not a dramatic explosion, but a quiet click. I was working late, reviewing the year-end financials for the company's charitable arm, the Briar Promise Foundation. It was my mother's legacy, a fund for local arts and education programs that my father publicly championed. On paper, it was a testament to Wexford Meridian's corporate responsibility. But I saw an anomaly: a consulting fee paid to a firm I'd never heard of. Arcadium Consulting, for an amount that was exactly 1/3 of the foundation's annual disbursements. It was listed under Event Logistics. My blood ran cold. I started digging. Arcadium Consulting was a ghost, a registered name with a PO box address. But its payments correlated perfectly with a series of wildly inflated invoices for Dahlia's corporate events. $300,000 for floral arrangements at a one-night gala, $150,000 for specialized lighting. The numbers were absurd, like monopoly money, but they were being approved. The invoices billowed with phantom costs, each one a paper flower blooming in a rain of stolen money. Following the digital breadcrumbs, I found that Arcadium Consulting made a single, monthly transfer to another entity, Lindenvale LLC. This one was even more opaque, but after weeks of cross-referencing in corporation documents and property records, I found the final link: the sole signatory for Lindenvale's accounts, the ultimate beneficiary of the siphoned charity funds, was a private trust based in Luxbridge. The trustee's name was Dahlia Keene. She wasn't just decorating parties. She was liquidating my mother's legacy to fund a life they hadn't yet earned. That was when the collection began. I became a digital wraith, a silent archivist of their sins. It started with screenshots of the foundation's ledgers and copies of the falsified invoices. Then I moved deeper. I used a software vulnerability in the internal email server to create a shadow archive of Dahlia's correspondence with the event vendors. I found the emails from the junior accountants, nervously questioning the figures. "Are you sure this is the final invoice for the catering? It seems quite high." Dahlia's replies were always charming and dismissive. I collected metadata, the invisible DNA of every digital file: creation dates, author credentials, modification histories. I pulled the entry logs for the executive floor, correlating the timestamps of wire transfers with who was in the building. Every piece of data was a thread, every invoice a nail. I wasn't building an argument. I was building a cage. They continued to see me as a fragile, overly sensitive girl. They saw my silence as submission. They had no idea that my silence was the sound of a vault door closing. I didn't need them to believe my story. I didn't need their confession or their apology. I just needed them to make one more mistake, to sign their name to one more lie, to deliver one more blow in front of a lens they didn't know was watching. I needed a single, perfect moment of indisputable proof. And tonight, as the camera flashed and the pain bloomed in my side. Dahlia had finally, graciously, provided it. The machine of my revenge was not built in a day. It was assembled piece by piece, calibrated in silence, right under their noses. The most critical component was handed to me exactly 1 month before the gala, not with a threat, but with a smile. My father and Dahlia had summoned me to his cavernous office on the 40th floor, the one with the view that swallowed Lake Briar whole. "Rowan," my father had said, steepling his fingers, "we feel your talents are being underutilized in strategy." Dahlia, perched on the edge of his desk like a decorative bird of prey, chimed in. "We've created a new role for you, acting director of special projects. It comes with a significant raise, of course." Special projects was a corporate Siberia, a title that meant everything and nothing, a place where careers went to die quietly. But it wasn't a demotion. It was a cage. The raise was the bait, and the document they slid across the polished mahogany table was the trap. It was a non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. It was thick, heavy, and bound in a dark blue cover, as substantial as a hardback novel. "Just a formality," my father said, waving a dismissive hand. "Standard for executive-level promotions, a sign of mutual trust." I picked it up. It was warm from the printer. I spent that night reading it. Not in my apartment, but in a 24-hour university library, away from any prying corporate or personal networks. Most of it was boilerplate, but then I found it. Clause 14.3. It was a masterpiece of ambiguous legal malice. It forbade me, in perpetuity, from disclosing any information, personal or professional, which could reasonably be construed as detrimental to the public image, reputation, or goodwill of the founding family. Not just the company, the family. They weren't just protecting their stock price. They were legally mandating my silence about their private behavior. They were putting a price tag on their abuse. The next morning, I played my part. I sent an email to our internal legal counsel, Arthur Vance, a man whose spine was as flexible as his billing schedule. "Arthur," I wrote, "I seem to be having a technical issue. The file you sent over is corrupted and crashes my PDF reader. Could you possibly send a clean, unlocked copy? I just want to do my due diligence before signing." I used the words I knew they associated with me. Confused. Technical issue. Clumsy. He replied within 5 minutes. "Of course. Rowan, apologies. Try this one." The file he sent was perfect. I didn't open it. I went straight to its properties, its digital fingerprint. It was exactly what I'd hoped for. The PDF wasn't clean at all. It was embedded with tracking fields. It contained metadata that would report back to their servers the instant it was opened, the IP address that opened it, and how long it was viewed. They weren't just asking me to sign. They were monitoring my compliance. This time-stamped, trackable file was my proof of issuance. They had, with their own digital hands, confirmed their intent. I printed one hard copy from this malicious file. I found Dahlia near the espresso machine in the executive lounge, laughing with 2 VPs. "All sorted, darling?" she asked, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Just had a few questions, but I figured it out," I said, offering the paper and a pen. "Good girl." She didn't even read it. She scrawled her name with a flourish in the witness block, her pen digging deep into the paper. She was using a bright burgundy ink. Before capping her pen, she checked her reflection in the chrome of the machine, reapplied her lipstick, and pressed her lips to a napkin. The signature was bold, arrogant, and impatient. The act was so careless, so dismissive, it was almost beautiful. Now I had the weapon. I needed to hide it in plain sight, somewhere they could never erase. Back at my desk, I scanned the signed document, all 30 pages, including her burgundy signature. I saved it as a PDF, but I didn't file it in my personnel folder. I navigated deep into the company's archival server, to a subfolder buried in the compliance directory. I named the file Q3 Vendor Audits Charter Compliance V4I PDF. It was a deliberately boring, deliberately mislabeled file, but it contained two key triggers. First, the audit tag would flag it for our data loss prevention (DLP) system, which, paranoid about leaks, would automatically create a shadow copy in a protected partition. Second, and more importantly, I had added the tag Charter Compliance 3 months prior. I had been on the committee that rewrote our data retention policy. I had personally drafted the rule that any document tagged Charter Compliance relating to the company's founding charter, which governed the Breyer Promise Foundation, was to be immediately and automatically mirrored to our off-site third-party archival vendor. This was a legal fail-safe to protect against internal data destruction in case of an SEC investigation. The moment I hit Save, a protocol I designed whirred to life in a server farm in another state. An immutable copy of my NDA, the one that proved they were silencing me about family matters, was now logged, encrypted, and stored by a neutral third party. It was legally untouchable. Beyond the reach of my father's IT department or Dahlia's influence, they had built a cage and, by mislabeling the lock, I had mailed the only key to a bank vault they didn't know existed. The NDA was the legal framework. Next, I needed the financial proof. This, I built myself. I called it Project Quiet Ledger. To any IT admin, it was a single Excel file on my network drive named Personal Budget 2025 XLSX. I even gave it a decoy tab. Vacation Fund, with pictures of palm trees. The real work was hidden in sheets named Fluffy B-Day 09, Milo Vet Costs, and Spring Garden Plan. These sheets were not budgets. They were a live dashboard of Dahlia's fraud. A cell in Milo Vet Costs, labeled Specialty Food, wasn't a number. It was a nested formula. It contained a lookup command tied to a protected data query that scraped the live accounting ledger for the Breyer Promise Foundation. Another cell. Grooming pulled the corresponding wire transfers to Arcadium Consulting. A third. Medication tracked the outgoing payments from Arcadium to Lindenvale LLC, the final cell. Total monthly cost was my masterpiece. It wasn't a sum formula. It was a reconciliation command. If the money siphoned from Breyer Promise exactly matched the deposits into Linden Vale, minus a small, consistent fee for the shell company, the cell would simply display the total. But if the numbers ever failed to align, if someone got sloppy, the cell was conditionally formatted to turn bright red and display the text, Reconciliation Failure, Audit. I didn't need to update it. I just needed to open it. The company's own network did the work, refreshing the data links, pulling the latest proof of her theft in real time. And the final, beautiful piece of irony, this file, this incriminating digital ledger, was diligently protected by my father's own IT policy. Dahlia, in her quest for absolute control, had insisted on a mandatory nightly backup of all employee network drives to prevent data loss. Every night at 2 a.m., the company's main server would crawl my drive, find Personal Budget 2025.xlsx, and create a time-stamped, versioned backup. The system, designed to protect their assets, was now fastidiously curating a historical record of their crimes for me. The trap was set. The legal mechanism was secured off-site. The financial evidence was being backed up by their own servers every single night. The engine was built, fueled, and humming in the darkness. All the intricate moving parts were in place. I just stood back and waited. I was waiting for one more act of careless cruelty, one more moment of family business that would violate Clause 14.3. I was waiting for a single, undeniable mistake. I just needed one more hit, and a flash. The applause from my father was a distant roar, like the sound of the ocean heard through a thick wall. My entire consciousness had collapsed to the searing point of impact in my side. Each breath was a negotiation with a hot, sharp pain. I held my smile for 3 more seconds, a duration I measured in heartbeats, then turned away from the lights with a practiced, graceful pivot. "Just need to fix my zipper," I murmured to the air, my voice a steady, low thing that didn't betray the fire in my ribs. I walked, not ran, towards the backstage area, a labyrinth of black curtains and stacked equipment cases. My steps were even and measured. My posture perfect. I was a keen, and keens did not show weakness, especially not in front of the catering staff. I found a small, shadowed alcove behind a rack of audio equipment, the air smelling of dust and electricity. Leaning against the cool concrete wall, I finally allowed myself to close my eyes. My hand went to my side, my fingers gently probing the tender flesh beneath the silk of my gown. The pain was real, a deep, resonant ache. It was proof. And then, I felt it, a faint, precise vibration against the skin of my wrist. 2 short, sharp buzzes from the watch. It wasn't a notification, it was a confirmation. Capture complete. File saved to internal memory. A cold, clean wave of triumph washed through me, momentarily eclipsing the pain. The first lock had turned. I took a single, deep, shuddering breath and pushed myself off the wall. When I re-emerged into the golden light of the gala, my composure was a flawless, newly applied coat of armor. "There you are. Everything okay?" A young man with a lanyard identifying him as an assistant photographer intercepted me. He had a tablet in his hands and an eager-to-please energy. "We got some fantastic shots. The agency wants to do a quick preview selection. Make sure we have the perfect family moment for the morning press release." "Of course," I said, my voice smooth as glass. The lighting seemed excellent. He beamed, relieved. "It's amazing, right? Here, take a look." He swiped through a few images on his tablet. There we were, the perfect family, smiling under the honey gold lights, in one frame. My eyes were half closed from the flash. In another, my father's smile was a little too tight, and in the third one, the one taken at the exact moment of impact, my expression was a mask of placid grace, while a subtle, almost imperceptible tension radiated from Dahlia's posture. To the untrained eye, it was nothing. To me, it was a confession. "These are good," I said, handing the tablet back. "But I'd prefer to review the full set. We have a very specific aesthetic we maintain for internal archives. Could you send a link to the complete, unedited album to my corporate email? I'll make the final selections from there." "Absolutely, Ms. Keene," he said, already tapping at his tablet. He then pulled a business card from his pocket. "The main gallery link will be on the card, and the password for your private album will be in the email. It should be uploaded by midnight." "Thank you," I said, taking the card. "I appreciate your efficiency." As he walked away, I glanced at the card. It was for a high-end digital photography service. I turned it over in my hand. He'd done exactly as I'd planned. He'd given me the front door. I didn't go home. I went to a quiet, anonymous corporate suite I kept under a different name, a sterile space with fast, untraceable internet. At 11:52 p.m., the email arrived. I opened it, clicked the link, and entered the password. A gallery of 200 photographs bloomed across my screen. Before I downloaded a single image, I navigated to the portal's settings menu. It was a clean, minimalist interface, designed for busy clients. Tucked away under download options was a small, unassuming checkbox, usually ignored by art directors and marketing managers who only cared about the final image. The label next to it read, "Request original EXIF data with download." Exchangeable image file format, the digital soul of a photograph, the camera model, the lens type, the aperture, the shutter speed, and most importantly, the exact time the shutter was pressed, down to the millisecond, and, if the camera was GPS-enabled, the precise coordinates where the photo was taken. I clicked the box. Then I selected Download All. The files were massive, uncompressed raw images. As they streamed onto my encrypted hard drive, I opened a second window. In it was the security log from the Marrowgate Hotel's event floor, a file I had requisitioned 2 days earlier under the pretext of a routine security protocol review for high-profile events. I scrolled to the log for camera 7, the one mounted in the corner overlooking the photography backdrop. The timestamps were a relentless, scrolling river of data. I opened the first downloaded photo. Then I opened its EXIF data in a separate program. Timestamp 20:14:32. I looked at the security log. Camera 7. Timestamp 20:14:32. The feeds were in sync, the data streams aligned like two panes of glass clicking perfectly into place. I now had two independent, time-stamped visual records of the same moment, from two different angles. I spent the next hour meticulously examining each photograph, cross-referencing every timestamp. I wasn't just looking at our faces, I was looking at everything else: the background, the reflections, the accidental details captured in the periphery, and then, on image 147, I found it. It was one of the wider shots. To our left, a waiter was holding a polished silver champagne tray. The surface was curved, distorting the reflection like a funhouse mirror, but the reflection was there. I zoomed in, the pixels resolving into a grotesque caricature of the scene. My father, a tall, distorted figure. Me, a wavering shape of blue. And Dahlia. Her face was a warped mask of fury, her teeth bared in a silent snarl that was invisible from the front, and her hand, the one not visible in the main photograph, was not resting gently on my back. It was a claw, a white-knuckled fist of emerald silk and diamonds, pressing violently into the reflection of my side, the angle of her arm, the tension in her wrist. It was not a pose, it was an attack. My breath hitched. It was better than my own watch camera footage. My camera captured the motion, but this was the intent, written on her face, reflected in perfect, damning clarity. My movements became sharp, economical. I exported 3 files. First, image 147, the primary photograph, the perfect family. Second, a cropped and enhanced version of the reflection from the champagne tray, the truth. Third, a screenshot from the security camera footage at the exact corresponding timestamp, 20:14:41, the moment the EXIF data said image 147 was taken. The corroboration. 3 layers of reality, one seamless narrative of assault. I layered them into a single presentation slide, drawing red arrows, adding timestamp annotations. I was no longer a victim. I was a forensic analyst presenting her findings. I saved the slide as a high-resolution image. I took that image, along with the original photo, the raw security footage, and a text file containing the complete EXIF data, and I compressed them. A new file appeared on my desktop, a single, tidy zip archive. I renamed it flowers2.zip. It was a small, private joke, a nod to the inflated floral invoices that had started it all. The system prompted me for a password. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing the phrase my father had used as a warning, the mantra of our family's dysfunction. Dramato night. The final step. I logged into my Wexford Meridian corporate email account. I composed a new message. I attached the flowers to zip file. In the recipient line, I typed my own name, Rowan Keene. The subject line was bland, corporate, and utterly forgettable. Supplementary menu. I hit send, the file uploaded, and the email disappeared from my outbox. I knew what would happen next. The company's email server would process it, log it, scan it for viruses, and then deliver it to my inbox. In doing so, it would create its own indelible record of the transaction, time-stamped and archived on the company's own hardware. The evidence was now in their system, a digital time bomb waiting for me to forward it. It was hidden in the open, protected by the very infrastructure they had built to protect themselves. The night of photos was over. The traces were secure. The summons arrived at 7:12 a.m., not a phone call, but a calendar invitation that simply appeared on my screen, cold and imperative. Meeting. Corporate conduct. The location was conference room 40B, a glass box typically used for uncomfortable conversations. The attendees were listed: Dahlia Keene, myself, Patricia Vale from Human Resources, and Arthur Vance, our Chief Internal Counsel. My father's name was conspicuously absent. He was never a part of the dirty work, only its beneficiary. I had slept for exactly 94 minutes in the corporate suite, a deep, dreamless plunge into oblivion. I'd spent the rest of the night orchestrating the morning. At 6:02 a.m., I was the first person at a 24-hour urgent care clinic on the other side of town. I paid cash. I didn't mention an assault. I simply said I'd had a bad fall. The young but overworked doctor was efficient. He palpated my side, his touch gentle but firm, and noted the deep, purplish bruising that was already beginning to mottle my skin. He gave me a prescription for a painkiller and what I really came for: a signed doctor's note on official letterhead. It was a simple, factual document. Patient presents with significant soft tissue contusions to the right lateral torso, consistent with blunt force trauma. It was a beautiful, sterile, unimpeachable sentence. I arrived at the 40th floor at 7:11 a.m. The air was chilled to a precise 68 degrees, smelling faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and the expensive dark roast coffee brewing in the executive kitchenette. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a low, monotonous energy, casting everything in a flat, unforgiving glare. When I entered 40B, they were already waiting. Dahlia sat at the head of the long, polished table, a vision of corporate power in a cream-colored pantsuit. Patricia Vale, a woman who had weathered 3 CEOs by perfecting an expression of concerned neutrality, sat to her right. Arthur Vance, looking pale and sleep-deprived, sat opposite, his hands clasped nervously around a leather-bound portfolio. The silence was absolute. "Rowan, thank you for being prompt," Dahlia began, her voice crisp. She didn't offer me coffee. "We need to discuss your behavior at the gala last night." I took the seat at the far end of the table, placing my satchel on the floor beside me. "My behavior?" Patricia cleared her throat, opening a file. "Dahlia has brought a complaint to our attention. She reports that you caused a disruption during the official photography session, and that your general attitude was uncooperative and inappropriate for a representative of the founding family." I let the accusation hang in the refrigerated air. I looked from Patricia's carefully neutral face to Dahlia's confident smirk. "I see," I said. "On that subject, I'd like to request immediate medical leave." I reached into my satchel, pulled out the doctor's note, and slid it across the table. It glided over the polished surface, coming to a stop directly in front of Patricia. She picked it up with 2 perfectly manicured fingers, her eyebrows arching slightly as she read it. Dahlia let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like ice cracking. "A fall?" she said, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "Rowan, you've always been so clumsy. You really must watch your step." The word accident slid from her lips, smooth and practiced, as if she'd rehearsed it in the mirror that morning. Patricia placed the note down carefully. "Blunt force trauma. That sounds serious. Rowan?" Her expression was unreadable. She was a professional, and an official doctor's note, regardless of the surrounding narrative, was a document she had to take seriously. It was a liability. "It was a difficult night," I said, my voice even. "Indeed," Dahlia cut in, her patience clearly wearing thin. "But your personal accidents are not the issue. The issue is your professional conduct. We are considering a formal reprimand." I met her gaze. The game was over. It was time to change the rules. I reached into my satchel again and pulled out the USB drive. It was a simple, black, capless device, utterly anonymous. I placed it on the table. It made a small, definitive click against the wood. The sound seemed to fill the room. "What is that?" Arthur Vance asked, speaking for the first time, his voice raspy. "A supplementary menu," I said. Dahlia rolled her eyes, a theatrical display of exasperation. "We are not playing games. Rowan, this is a serious disciplinary meeting." She waved a dismissive hand at the drive. "Arthur, see what's on it. I'm sure it's just another one of her dramatic little projects." Arthur looked at Dahlia, then at me. A flicker of professional caution crossed his face. Plugging an unknown USB into a company laptop was against every IT protocol, but Dahlia was the executive vice president, and her husband was the chairman. Her command was not a suggestion. With a sigh of resignation, Arthur took the drive, turned to the conference room laptop, and slid it into the USB port. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, the file directory popped up, showing a single folder. Inside was one file. Presentation, PTX. Arthur double-clicked it. The laptop was connected to the large monitor on the wall, and the image that appeared was massive, filling our field of vision. It was image 147, the perfect family. My father, proud and smiling. Dahlia, adoring and beautiful. Me, serene and composed, standing between them. Dahlia smiled. "See? A photo. How lovely. Are we done here?" I didn't say anything. I just watched Arthur's face. He used the trackpad to click to the next slide. The screen changed. The new image was grainy, distorted, monstrous. It was the reflection from the champagne tray, blown up to fill the screen. Dahlia's face, a grotesque mask of rage. Her hand, a claw of white knuckles and emerald silk, digging into my side. The room was utterly silent, save for the hum of the air conditioner. I saw Patricia Vale's hand fly to her mouth. Arthur Vance froze, his finger hovering over the trackpad. Dahlia's triumphant smirk had vanished, replaced by a rigid, alabaster stillness. Arthur clicked one more time. The final slide appeared. It was a composite. On the left, the perfect family photo. In the middle, the damning reflection. On the right, the screenshot from the hotel's security camera. A bright red circle was drawn around the three of us, and a digital clock in the corner of the security footage displayed the time in glowing green numbers. 20:14:41.22. An arrow pointed from that timestamp to the EXIF data I had pasted below the main photo. Capture time, 20:14:41:08. Patricia Vale let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. Arthur Vance slowly pulled his hand back from the laptop as if it were red hot. He looked at Dahlia, then at me, and his face was the color of old parchment. He cleared his throat. "Dahlia," he said, his voice low and strained, "perhaps Ms. Vale and I need to discuss this with you privately." The spell was broken. Dahlia shot to her feet, the legs of her chair scraping harshly against the floor. The sound was violent in the silent room. "This is absurd," she snapped, her voice high and brittle. "The photo is distorted. It's a misunderstanding, a complete misunderstanding." I stood up as well, my movements calm and deliberate. I looked directly at her, past the crumbling facade of her power. "Perhaps," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the cold room. "But this misunderstanding has a money trail." I saw the flicker of comprehension and pure terror in her eyes. She knew. She knew that I knew. She understood that the assault was not the endgame. It was merely the key. I picked up my satchel. I did not wait for a reply. I walked to the door, my heels clicking softly on the floor. I left them there, bathed in the cold fluorescent light, staring at the 3 layers of truth displayed on the screen. I left them with the evidence of their violence and the promise of a far greater crime about to be exposed. As the heavy door swung shut behind me, the last thing I heard was the quiet, steady hum of the office machinery. It sounded like a clock, ticking. The phrase I left hanging in the chilled air of the conference room was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, a promise. Dahlia's crime wasn't the clumsy, emotional act of violence. That was merely a symptom. Her real crime was a thing of cold, hard numbers, and I had the ledger. My Project Quiet ledger was not a weapon I had to build. It was a map I simply had to read. On the surface, it remained a deceptively simple Excel file, but its interconnected cells formed a living, breathing diagram of Dahlia's greed. The first column, sourced directly from the Briar Promise Foundation's live accounting server, showed the outflow. Clean, respectable charitable donations. The second column showed where it all went. A single, recurring wire transfer to Arcadium Consulting. This was the first layer of the fiction, the plausible deniability of a third-party vendor. The third column showed the money's next move. Arcadium Consulting, a company that produced nothing but invoices, making its own single, recurring wire transfer to a second entity, Lindenvale LLC. This was the second layer, the one meant to be the final, impenetrable dead end. For weeks, Lindenvale had been a ghost to me. Its incorporation papers were filed in a state known for its corporate privacy laws, and its registered agent was a firm that specialized in creating anonymous shell companies. But Dahlia had made one small, arrogant mistake. To open the final bank account for Lindenvale, the one that would actually hold the stolen cash, the bank required the name of a trustee for the ultimate beneficiary, a private trust in Luxbridge. It was a minor procedural detail, a box to be checked on a form she probably never thought would see the light of day. But I had found that form, buried in a due diligence request I'd filed under the guise of a potential corporate acquisition. The signatory, the final hand controlling the flow of my mother's legacy, was Dahlia Keene. The map was complete. The money flowed from the foundation my mother had built, through 2 empty corporate shells, and into a private account controlled by the woman who had replaced her. It was a clean, elegant, and utterly damning path, but a map, no matter how detailed, is still an abstraction. To make the crime real, to make a board of directors and a group of shareholders truly understand, I needed to show them not just the path, but what was at the end of it. I needed to show them what their charity had bought. I found it in the invoices from the Founders Circle Gala. One line item stood out for its sheer absurdity: $319,450 for floral arrangements and venue ambiance. The amount was an insult to intelligence. I ran a search through public property records for any real estate transactions in the affluent suburbs of Northwood in the 3 days following the payment of that invoice. I found it almost immediately: a cash deposit made on a newly constructed 5-bedroom home. The down payment was for 20% of the asking price. The amount of the deposit was $310,450.22. It matched to the penny. Dahlia hadn't even bothered to disguise it. She had taken money meant for children's art programs and used it to buy herself a new house. And she had used the gala, my father's crowning achievement, as the vehicle. The final piece of evidence was not a number, but a human voice, captured in the sterile black and white text of an email. While combing through the shadow archive of accounting correspondence, I found a message from a junior accountant, a young man named Ben Carter, sent to Dahlia a week before the gala. The subject line was, Question Re, Invoice 774B, Florals. The email read, Hi Dahlia, Ben here from AP. I'm looking at the final invoice from the floral vendor, and the total is a bit, well, substantial. It's likely to get flagged by the automated audit system. Just wanted to check if you'd like me to break this payment down into 3 smaller, separate invoices under different expense codes. Might make it easier to get through the approval process without any delays. Let me know. Dahlia's reply, sent from her phone 2 minutes later, was a single, cheerful, damning word: perfect. Ben Carter wasn't a criminal. He was a young, ambitious accountant trying to be helpful, trying to smooth the way for an executive vice president. He saw a problem and offered a solution. What he had unwittingly done was create a written record of conspiracy to defraud the company. I saved the email thread as a standalone file, but an email can be faked, an image photoshopped. I needed to make it irrefutable. I ran the email file through a cryptographic hashing algorithm, SHA-256. The process converted the entire file, every word, every punctuation mark, every bit of metadata, into a unique, 64-character string of letters and numbers. This hash was a digital fingerprint. If anyone, anywhere, ever altered my saved email by so much as a single pixel, the hash would change completely. I copied the original, unchangeable hash into a text file, then, through a secure, encrypted messaging service, I sent that text file, not the email itself, just its digital fingerprint, to the personal account of a corporate litigator I had retained weeks ago. A woman who knew nothing of the situation except that I was paying her to be ready. The proof of the email's existence and its exact original content was now held, time-stamped, by an officer of the court. With the evidence locked and loaded, it was time to fire the first shot. I went to the Wexford Meridian corporate intranet and found the link for the anonymous whistleblower hotline. It was a system designed to protect employees from retaliation, a place for quiet whispers and unsigned letters. I filled out the form, methodically and dispassionately detailing the illicit flow of funds from the Breyer Promise Foundation. I cited the shell corporations. I referenced the inflated invoices. I attached nothing. I simply laid out the facts. And then, at the bottom of the form, in the space for the anonymous complainant's name, I typed my own, Rowan Keene. I had used their anonymous system to create an official, unignorable record, and by signing my name, I had triggered a specific, unavoidable protocol in the corporate bylaws, another one I knew by heart. Any formal allegation of financial misconduct made against a senior executive by another officer of the company required the immediate formation of an independent committee of the board of directors to investigate. They could no longer handle this in the family. I had just forced them to open their doors to outside scrutiny. The gears of their own governance were now turning against them. But an investigation takes time. Dahlia and my father were masters of delay and obfuscation. I needed to force a crisis, a moment of decision that they could not postpone. For that, I needed leverage. For the past year, I had been using a portion of my substantial salary and stock options to quietly buy up shares of Wexford Meridian on the open market through a blind trust. It wasn't enough to threaten a controlling interest, but it was enough to cross a critical threshold. I now held just enough stock to legally compel the board to add an item to the agenda of any shareholder meeting. I drafted a formal request to the board of directors. I called for a special emergency shareholder meeting to be held within 10 business days, and I submitted my required agenda item. The sole reason for the meeting, the title was a piece of dry, beautiful corporate speak, designed to sound responsible and prudent, not revolutionary. Proposal for shareholder vote. To approve the immediate, temporary appointment of an interim chief executive officer for the express purpose of ensuring full compliance with the company's founding charter. And on the line for the proposed candidate, the person who would take control of my father's company to protect my mother's legacy, I typed 2 words. Rowan Keene. He did not call. The invitation came as a text message, delivered with the impersonal chime of a routine notification. River and Reed. 12:30. It was a command, not a request, a summons to a place of his choosing, a neutral ground where he could control the narrative. River and Reed was one of my father's favorite places for difficult conversations. It was designed to soothe, a corporate executive's idea of a rustic lodge. The walls were paneled in thick, fragrant pine that smelled faintly of resin, a clean, natural scent that was entirely at odds with the business conducted within them. Through the large picture windows, you could see the fast-moving waters of the Breyer River. Beneath the floorboards, a system of hidden pipes circulated water, creating a constant, gentle burble meant to mimic a tranquil stream. It was a manufactured calm, an expensive illusion. He was already seated when I arrived, at a corner table shrouded in discreet shadow. He didn't look up. His attention was fixed on the screen of his phone, his thumb making slow, deliberate scrolling motions. He was performing nonchalance, a man with too many important things on his mind to be bothered by the arrival of his own daughter. I sat down opposite him. The waitress appeared, a phantom in black, and placed a glass of iced water in front of me. He ordered a black coffee for himself without looking at her, then returned his gaze to his phone. The silence stretched, thick and heavy as the polished wood of the table between us. Finally, after another full minute of scrolling, he spoke. The words were not directed at me, but at the glowing screen in his hand. "You're embarrassing the family. Rowan." It was his opening move, a classic gambit. He wasn't accusing me of being wrong. He was accusing me of being disloyal. He was framing my actions not as a matter of corporate malfeasance, but as a breach of some sacred, unspoken filial code. He was trying to make me feel small, to make me feel shame. I did not respond to the accusation. Instead, I reached into my satchel and retrieved a single, slim envelope. I placed it on the table between us. Inside was one photograph, printed that morning on heavy, glossy, 8x10 paper. He continued to stare at his phone, refusing to acknowledge it. "Did you hear me? The board is in an uproar. The shareholders are calling. This stunt of yours." I slid the envelope 2 inches closer to him. "Look at it." My voice was quiet, but it cut through the manufactured burble of the water pipes. With an exaggerated, world-weary sigh, he finally put his phone face down on the table. He picked up the envelope, his movements slow with irritation. He pulled out the photograph. And he stopped. Everything about him went still. His breath, his hands, the impatient tapping of his fingers he hadn't even been aware of. It all ceased. He was looking at the distorted, monstrous reflection in the silver champagne tray. He was looking at Dahlia's face, twisted into a mask of rage. He was looking at her white-knuckled hand, buried in my side. He stared at the image for a long time, his face a blank mask. He wasn't seeing a photograph. He was seeing evidence. He was seeing a narrative he could not control. When he finally looked up, the irritation was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. He placed the photograph face down on the table. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, confidential whisper. "Dahlia is pregnant." The words were delivered like a trump card, a hidden ace played at the last possible second. It was a breathtakingly cynical move, an appeal to a future I was supposedly threatening, to an innocent life I was callously disregarding. It was a shield made of flesh and blood, and he was holding it up, expecting me to drop my sword. I saw it for exactly what it was, a pathetic, desperate piece of emotional blackmail. My own voice was flat, devoid of the shock he had expected. A child doesn't need to inherit a criminal enterprise. The shield had failed. A flicker of something, anger, frustration, crossed his face before he suppressed it. The negotiation had truly begun. "What do you want, Rowan?" he asked. The question clipped and raw. This was the language he understood. Not family, not loyalty, not shame. It was a transaction. He was asking for my price. I leaned forward, my own voice a mirror of his quiet intensity. I did not need to think. My terms were etched into my mind. "I want the truth, a full, independent audit of the Breyer Promise Foundation, going back 5 years. He flinched, but I continued. "I want the interim CEO position, effective immediately upon the announcement of your medical leave." His jaw tightened. "And I want every single one of the 43 positions that were eliminated in the last quarter to fund Dahlia's event budget to be reinstated, with back pay." He sat back in his chair, the leather creaking in protest. He looked out the window at the rushing river, his eyes distant. He was running the calculations, weighing the cost of a public scandal against the cost of my demands. He was weighing the value of his wife and his reputation against the value of his company. It took him a long time. Finally, he let out a long, slow breath. It was the sound of a king conceding a major piece of territory. "No drama," he said, the words a sigh of defeat. It was the family mantra, the phrase he had used his entire life to sweep things under the rug, to demand silence, to maintain the perfect, placid surface of our lives. But the words were hollow now. He was pleading, not commanding. The waitress returned with his coffee. I waited until she was gone. I took a slow sip of my water, the ice clinking against the glass. I looked at my father, this man who had built an empire but could not manage a family. This man who saw a pregnancy not as a joy, but as a bargaining chip. "Drama is the reflection in the silver tray," I said, my voice as cold and clear as the water in my glass. "Drama is an SEC investigation. Drama is a shareholder lawsuit that names you and your pregnant wife as co-conspirators." I leaned forward one last time and pushed the photo back towards him. "Compliance," I said, "is what I do." He didn't respond. He simply stared at the back of the photograph. He raised his hand and signaled for the check. When the waitress brought it, he placed his credit card in the leather folio without looking at the total, and as he signed the slip, his powerful, familiar signature suddenly looking shaky and small, he did not once, look at me. The Cedargate Convention Center was a temple of corporate anonymity. The shareholder meeting was held in Auditorium C, a cavernous, tiered room with gray acoustic paneling and the faint, cold smell of recycled air. On the massive screen behind the dais, the Wexford Meridian logo glowed within serene, blue light. The air hummed with the low murmur of dozens of quiet conversations, the rustle of freshly printed agendas, and the soft, intermittent clicks of microphones being tested. This was not a boardroom. It was a courtroom, and the shareholders were the jury. My father and Dahlia sat at the center of the long table on the stage, a united front of polished composure. My father looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than they had been at our lunch. Dahlia was a statue in charcoal gray, her face a mask of serene confidence that I knew was costing her every ounce of her control. I sat several chairs down, with the other board members, a part of the tableau but separate from its center. I was not family today. I was agenda item 4. The meeting began with the usual drone of procedural formalities, the reading of the previous meeting's minutes, a dry report from the CFO. Then, the chairman of the independent committee, a stern, silver-haired man named Alistair Finch, whom I knew had a reputation for incorruptibility, was invited to the podium. The low murmur in the room ceased. This was the moment everyone was waiting for. Alistair adjusted his microphone. As per the corporate bylaws, he began, his voice resonating through the silent room. An independent committee was formed to investigate a formal allegation of financial misconduct brought by an officer of this company against a senior executive. He did not use our names. He did not need to. Our investigation is in its preliminary stages, he continued, every word carefully chosen. However, the committee has found sufficient evidence to confirm the existence of significant financial anomalies relating to the Breyer Promise Foundation. We have identified a series of substantial, regularly scheduled asset transfers from the foundation's accounts to a third-party consultancy firm, which in turn transferred those exact funds to a second, privately held LLC. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. At this time, we have been unable to identify any legitimate services rendered or products delivered that would justify these payments. The committee has unanimously recommended that a full forensic audit be conducted by an outside firm. Dahlia leaned forward, pressing the button on her microphone. The small red light glowed to life. Alistair, she said, her voice smooth and reasonable. While I applaud the committee's diligence, I think we are blowing a simple accounting misunderstanding out of proportion. This is a complex matter of vendor payments that... Alistair Finch did not look at her. He simply gave a nod to the technician in the control booth at the back of the room. If you could please bring up the first slide, he said. The Wexford Meridian logo on the massive screen behind them vanished. It was replaced by the cold, black and white text of Ben Carter's email. The subject line, question re, invoice 774 B, florals, seemed to hang in the air. The body of the email was starkly clear. Would you like me to break this payment down into 3 smaller, separate invoices? And below it, Dahlia's cheerful, one-word reply, sent from her phone. Perfect. A gasp rippled through the front rows of shareholders. Dahlia's microphone was still on, and her sharp, indrawn breath was audible throughout the auditorium. And the next slide, please, Alistair said, his voice a flat, relentless monotone. The email was replaced by a flowchart. It was a simplified, elegant visualization of my Project Quiet ledger. A box on the left, labeled Breyer Promise Foundation, had a thick red arrow leading from it. The arrow pointed to a second box, Arcadium Consulting. Another red arrow led from that box to a third, Lindenvale LLC, and from that final box, a last arrow pointed to 2 images, a photograph of the new house in Northwood, and a scanned copy of the bank form naming Dahlia Keene as the sole signatory. Arrow upon arrow, a direct, undeniable line from my mother's charity to Dahlia's personal wealth. Dahlia's microphone clicked off. She sat back in her chair, her face ashen. The mask had shattered. Alistair Finch concluded, "The committee's work will continue, that is all." He walked back to his seat, leaving the damning flowchart burning on the screen behind the board of directors. The company secretary, a nervous man with a reedy voice, stepped up to the podium. "We will now move to the special agenda item submitted for this meeting. Item 4, a proposal to approve the temporary appointment of an interim chief executive officer." He looked out at the silent, stunned audience. "The floor is now open for discussion." For a moment, no one moved. Then, I stood up. I did not go to the main podium. I walked to a floor microphone in the aisle, positioning myself not as a member of the board, but as a shareholder, as one of them. I waited for the camera to find me, for my face to appear on the side screens. "My name is Rowan Keene," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I submitted this proposal. I'm not going to talk about the evidence you've just seen. That speaks for itself." I looked from the shareholders to the board members on the stage. "I am going to talk about what this company is. For the past several years, we have been run like a family drama, with private interests and personal conflicts taking precedence over corporate responsibility. We have allowed our resources to be treated as a private bank account. We have allowed our employees to be treated as expendable." My voice grew stronger, firmer. Wexford Meridian is not a family stage. It is not a vehicle for personal enrichment. It is a publicly traded corporation with a fiduciary duty to its shareholders and a moral duty to its employees and its community. This proposal is not about punishment. It is about stability. It is about restoring the principles of governance and compliance that have been so clearly abandoned. It is about ensuring this company survives this crisis and emerges stronger, cleaner, and more accountable. I finished and sat down. The silence that followed was profound. Then, a man in the third row stood up. He was Mark Jessup, the fund manager for a massive state pension fund, one of our largest institutional investors. "Mr. Secretary," he said, his voice booming with authority, "the North Star Pension Collective has already submitted its proxy vote. We vote yes on agenda item 4. That was the signal. That was the crack in the dam. I looked at my father. He was staring at me, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. I saw anger, betrayal. But underneath it all, a vast, hollow emptiness. He was a king watching his castle crumble. And he finally understood that he had handed his enemies the tools to do it. Arthur Vance, the lawyer, leaned over and whispered urgently in his ear. I knew what he was saying. "Don't fight it. A floor fight will tank the stock. The SEC will be here by noon. Take the leave. Cut your losses." My father held my gaze for one long, final moment. Then, he gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He had surrendered. The secretary, flustered, called for the vote. The process was a formality. The proxy votes from the institutional investors, swayed by weeks of my quiet, back-channel conversations, were already locked in. The smaller shareholders followed their lead. When the electronic tally appeared on the screen, the numbers were decisive. Agenda item 4. Passed. Dahlia stood up. Her movements were stiff, jerky, as if her body was no longer under her own control. She did not look at my father. She did not look at anyone. She walked towards the exit at the side of the stage, her expensive charcoal dress trailing behind her, the fabric, which had seemed so sharp and powerful just an hour before, now looked like a glitch, a smear of gray pixels against the polished floor, a formatting error about to be deleted. The secretary nervously announced my name. As per the vote, Rowan Keene is hereby appointed Interim Chief Executive Officer of Wexford Meridian. I walked from the aisle to the stage. I walked past my father, who would not meet my eyes. I walked to the main podium, the one Alistair Finch had used to deliver his verdict. I placed my hands on its smooth, cool surface and looked out at the room. Thank you, I said. My first official act as CEO will be to authorize the full forensic audit recommended by the independent committee. My second will be to reinstate every employee laid off in the last fiscal quarter. I paused, letting the words sink in. Starting today, our first priority is not our image, it is not our executives, it is our people. A smattering of applause started in the front rows. It was not loud, it was not a standing ovation, but it was steady, and it grew, a slow, rolling wave of sound that filled the cold, gray room. It was the sound of approval, of relief. It was the sound of a company beginning the long, quiet work of healing itself. It was not loud, but it was long. She was waiting for me where the secrets were kept. The sub-level document archive was a cold, sterile purgatory, smelling of old paper, ozone from the humming servers, and the faint, chemical scent of fire-retardant chemicals. The only sound was the high, thin hum of the fluorescent lights that cast a flat, shadowless glare on the rows of gray metal filing cabinets. Dahlia stood in the center aisle, looking small and utterly out of place in her tailored suit. The power she projected on the 40th floor had evaporated under the harsh, honest lights of the archive. She was clutching a manila folder to her chest like a shield. Her eyes were red-rimmed, glistening with unshed tears that looked like morning dew on a venomous flower. This was her last stand, an appeal to a humanity she didn't believe I possessed. As I approached, her carefully constructed composure broke. "Rowan, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Listen to me. I went too far. I know I did. I was scared. When I came here, I was so scared of losing it all." I didn't respond. I walked past her, the sound of my heels clicking on the polished concrete floor. I stopped at an unassuming gray cabinet at the end of the row, indistinguishable from the dozens of others. I spun the combination lock, the metallic clicks echoing in the silence. It wasn't a filing cabinet, it was a fireproof safe. With a final, soft thud, the lock disengaged. I swung the heavy door open. Inside, there was only one item, a single, thick document in a protective plastic sleeve. I slid it out and walked back to the central processing table that stood under the brightest of the lights. I laid the document on the cool metal surface. It was the non-disclosure agreement. Her flamboyant burgundy signature was still bright against the paper. Then, from my own portfolio, I produced a second document. It was much thinner, only 2 pages long. I placed it directly beside the first. The title was simple: Resignation and Cooperation Agreement. Dahlia stared at the 2 documents, the one that represented her arrogance and the one that represented her only escape. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That," I said, pointing to the NDA, "is a 30-page document you signed to ensure my silence about family matters. As you demonstrated at the gala, you breached the implicit terms of that agreement. As I demonstrated at the shareholder meeting, I have no intention of honoring it." I then tapped the new document. "And this is your future. It's a very simple agreement. It contains your immediate and irrevocable resignation from all positions at Wexford Meridian. It also contains a cooperation clause, obligating you to provide the independent committee with a full, truthful accounting of the financial structures you created to defraud the Briar Promise Foundation. Finally, it contains a detailed plan for the full restitution of all misappropriated funds from accounts that we both know you control." I paused, letting her absorb the totality of her situation. I met her tear-filled eyes with a gaze as flat and cold as the concrete floor. "You will sign this document. You will give the committee the passwords, the account numbers, and the names. You will return every single dollar. If you do that, the company will include a non-prosecution clause in your severance. The board will agree not to pursue criminal charges." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a low, clinical whisper. "You won't go to prison, Dahlia. If you open the safe and you open your mouth." She looked from my face to the papers, the last vestiges of her fight draining away. The tears finally fell, 2 silent tracks down her pale cheeks. She knew she was beaten. She had no leverage, no allies, and no way out. With a shuddering hand, she reached for the pen I was holding out. She uncapped it, the small plastic click unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Her signature on the new document was nothing like the arrogant scrawl on the NDA. It was small, cramped, and shaky. I took the signed pages from her without a word and walked them over to the high-speed scanner in the corner. I fed them into the machine. A thin line of green light passed over her signature, and the machine gave a soft, pleasant chime, confirming the digital capture. Her surrender was now a permanent, time-stamped record on the company's servers. As the scan finished, I turned back to her. There was one last loose thread, one final lie that needed to be snipped. "Pregnancy?" I asked, the single word an accusation. She stared at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. She wrapped her arms around herself. "It was a rumor," she whispered, the words barely audible. "A rumor I let spread. A weapon she had tried to use against me. A lie she had told my father. A lie he had been all too willing to believe, and to use himself." I felt nothing, no pity, no anger, not even satisfaction. Her confession was just another data point, a final confirmation of the moral vacuum I had been dealing with. I did not offer a single word of comfort. My silence was its own kind of discipline, a final judgment on her character. I pulled out my phone and composed a new text message. The recipient was Alistair Finch. The message contained a single word: executed. I hit send. At the far end of the room, a large, industrial paper shredder stood silent. For years, it had been the tool they used to destroy inconvenient records, to erase their mistakes. Now, it was just a dormant machine. Its job done, its purpose rendered obsolete by a different kind of record-keeping. It sat there, quiet and still, like a guard dog, tired after a long and vicious fight. Dahlia was still standing by the table, looking lost and broken. I walked past her towards the exit. My work here finished. As I reached the door, I paused, my hand on the handle. "No drama," I said, repeating my father's mantra back into the cold, sterile air of the archive, but the words were mine now. They were not a plea for silence or a tool of suppression. They were a statement of principle, a promise of a new order. One that was efficient, clean, and ruthlessly, beautifully, free of their noise. I stepped out onto the executive balcony on the 41st floor. The night air was cool and carried the unique scent of Lake Briar, a mixture of damp earth from the surrounding forests, the metallic tang of the commuter rail lines, and the clean, sharp smell of distant water. The sky was a hazy, starless canopy of bruised purple, reflecting the city's perpetual twilight back on itself. Below, the streets were rivers of light, headlights and taillights flowing in silent, orderly streams. The city was a machine, and from up here, I could finally see all its moving parts, the chaos resolved into a perfect, logical system. I heard the soft click of the heavy glass door opening and closing behind me. It was Mark, one of the in-house corporate communications photographers. He was young, nervous, and holding his camera like it was both a shield and a weapon. "Ms. Keene," he said, his voice hesitant. "Sorry to bother you. Comms sent me. They were hoping for a quick, a debut shot, for the morning announcement." The morning announcement, the memo that was, at this very moment, propagating through the company's email servers, a digital shockwave of change. I had written it myself an hour ago. It was concise, devoid of platitudes, and brutally efficient. It announced my father's immediate medical leave, my appointment as interim CEO, the reinstatement of the 43 laid-off employees, and the redirection of all discretionary funds from the executive event budget back to the Briar Promise Foundation. It was not a press release. It was a declaration of a new regime. "Of course, Mark," I said, turning from the railing. "Where would you like me?" "Here is perfect," he said, gesturing to the backdrop of the glittering city. "The symbolism is great. New leadership, new horizons, that kind of thing." I stood straight, my posture relaxed but firm. I placed my hands not on my hips in a pose of contrived power, but let them fall naturally to my sides, my fingertips brushing the sharp, clean seam of my jacket. It was the posture of someone who did not need to perform authority, but simply possessed it. "Ready?" he asked, raising the camera. "On 3, 1, 2. On the count of 3. I didn't smile. Instead, I shifted my weight slightly and turned my body just enough, a subtle quarter turn towards the light spilling from the office behind me. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was calculated. It was just enough to catch the light on the side of my torso, just enough to illuminate the faint, discolored shadow blooming on the pale silk of my blouse, a map of fading bruises that was still tender to the touch. The flash fired, a silent, brilliant explosion of white that bleached the world for a fraction of a second. In that moment of pure, artificial light, I looked directly down the barrel of the lens. My expression was not angry, or triumphant, or sad. It was calm. It was clear. And as the flash faded, leaving ghost images dancing in my vision, I spoke the first words of my tenure, not to him, but to the unseen audience the photo was destined for. "We're done with secrets." My phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out. The screen glowed, displaying a single, one-line text message from my father. "I'll be on medical leave." It was not an apology. It was not an explanation. It was a statement of compliance, the final, terse communication of a defeated king. It was the last move in a game he had just lost. I typed my reply. It was even shorter than his message. "Rest." I added no punctuation, no sentiment. It was an instruction, an absolution, and a dismissal. All in 4 letters. I hit send. Another notification popped up. An email, delivered to my private account after hours. The sender was Mark Jessup, the head of the North Star Pension Collective. The subject line was simply, "Agenda Item 4. The body of the email was just as brief. "Congratulations, Ms. Keene, a necessary and decisive action. We look forward to a new era of transparency." I read the words, and then I closed the email app before I could read any more like it. The praise, the validation, it was all just noise. The work was the only thing that mattered. I opened my photo gallery. Mark had already sent the test shot. I looked at the image on the small screen. The city lights were a perfect, glittering backdrop. My expression was calm, my gaze direct, and there, just visible in the sharp, unforgiving light of the flash, was the faint, ghostly trace of Dahlia's last mistake. It was not an accusation. It was a scar. It was a reminder that the foundation of the new Wexford Meridian was built on an ugly truth. I held my finger on the screen and a menu appeared. "Use as wallpaper." I selected it. The image of my own determined, bruised face now looked back at me from the screen of the device that had helped me win. It would serve as a temporary reminder of the cost of this victory, and the vigilance required to maintain it. Then, I pressed the button on the side, and the screen went dark. There was no need for applause. There was no need for an epilogue. The story was over. The drama was done. All that was left was the quiet hum of the city below, and a company. Finally still, finally clean, finally in its rightful place. Thank you so much for listening to our story tonight. We'd love to know where you're tuning in from, so drop a comment below and let us know. Feel free to share your thoughts on Rowan's journey. If you enjoyed this, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. And if you want to help us reach more listeners, please consider hitting that hype button to support the story.